Hi guys, I'm Hannah Micaela C. Butardo from BSBA HRM 22D. Today, our group will be presenting all about market mechanism. First, I will discuss all about the circular flow for microeconomics and the definition of market. Circular flow for microeconomics. The economy can be thought of as two cycles moving in opposite directions. In one direction, we see goods and services flowing from individuals to businesses and back again. This represents the idea that as laborers, we go to work to make things or provide services that people want. In the opposite direction, we see money flowing from businesses to households and back again. This represents the income we generate from the work we do, which we use to pay for the things we want. Both of these cycles are necessary to make the economy work. When we buy things, we pay money for them. When we go to work, we make things in exchange for money. The circular flow model of the economy distills the idea outlined above and shows the flow of money and goods and services in a capitalist economy. What is the circular flow model in economics? The circular flow model is an economic model that presents how money, goods, and services move between sectors in an economic system. The flows of money between the sectors are also tracked to measure a country's national income or GDP. So the model is also known as the circular flow of income. Understanding the circular flow model. The idea of circular flow was first introduced by economist Richard Cantillon in the 18th century and then progressively developed by Kinney, Marx, Keynes, and many other economists. It is one of the most basic concepts in macroeconomics. How an economy runs can be simplified as two cycles flowing in opposite directions. One is goods and services flowing from businesses to individuals, and individuals provide resources for production or labor force back to businesses. In the other direction, money flows from individuals to businesses as a consumer, expenditures on goods and services, and flows back to individuals as personal income or wages, dividends, or etc. for the labor force provided. This is the most basic circular flow model of an economy. In reality, there are more parties participating in a more complex structure or circular flows. Figure 2.1. In the upper loop is a flow model showing the exchange between businesses or producer and households or consumer in the resource market. The households as shown are the providers of inputs or resources or land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurs. Hence, the households receive payment from businesses called money income. The outflow of money from the businesses in exchange for the inputs or resources is called cost of production as businesses make the payment. On the other hand, the lower loop shows the exchange of output between businesses and households in the product market. Businesses produce goods and services which households demand to satisfy their wants. Businesses provides the goods and services and the households pay for these goods and services, which is shown by the outflow of money from the households. The money the households pay for the goods is called expenses of the consumer, while this same money received by businesses is called the revenue of the producer. Next are the implications of the circular flow model. As a fundamental concept of macroeconomics, the circular flow model has been widely applied in different studies, with significant impacts on the understanding of economics. Four examples are listed below to show the significance of the model. First is the measurement of national income. The sectors in the circular flow model are the components of the calculation of national income. The expenditure approach calculates a nation's GDP as the sum of the household consumption expenditures, private domestic investment, government consumption, and investment expenditures, and net exports. Second is the knowledge of interdependence. The circular flow model underpins the knowledge of interdependence between sectors in an economic system. The activities and money flows cannot take place without interaction with another sector. Third is the unending nature of economic activities. Money and economic resources flow in cycles indefinitely with equilibrium of aggregate income and expenditures. And lastly is the injections and leakages. The circular flow of an economy is balanced when the total injections equal the leakages. If injections overweight leakages, the country's national income will grow. If injections are below leakages, the national income will decrease. Lastly are the injections and leakages. The circular flow of an economy is balanced when the total injections equal the leakages. If injections overweight leakages, the country's national income will grow. If injections are below leakages, the national income will decrease. After discussing the circular flow for microeconomics, now we head on to the definition of market. Markets bring together buyers and sellers, whether these are the product market of the resource market. A market exists as long as there are buyers and sellers who agree on the price, hence, transaction takes place. The agreed upon price is called the market price or equilibrium price. Take note that a market does not exist in a definite place only. It can exist anywhere as long as there are buyers and sellers who agree on the price. A market exists even without a face-to-face contact because even by phone or by mail alone, there can be a market like the online market. When we talk about markets, there are many types of markets. Markets vary wildly for a number of reasons, including the kinds of products sold, location, duration, size, and constituency of the customer base, size, legality, and many other factors. Aside from the two most common markets, or the physical and virtual, there are other kinds of markets where parties can gather to execute their transactions. First is what we call the black market. A black market refers to an illegal market where transactions occur without the knowledge of the government or other regulatory agencies. Many black markets exist in order to circumvent existing tax laws. This is why many involve cash-only transactions or other forms of currency, making them harder to track. Many black markets exist in countries with planned or command economies, wherein the government controls the production and distribution of goods and services, and in other countries that are developing. When there is a shortage of certain goods and services in the economy, members of the black market steps in and fill in the void. Black markets can also exist in developed economies as well. This is prevalent when price control the sale of certain products or services, especially when the demand is high. Ticket scalping is one example. When demand for concert tickets are high, scalpers will step in and sell them at inflated prices on the black market. Second is the auction market. An auction market brings many people together for the sale and purchase of specific lots of goods. The buyers or bidders try to top each other for the purchase price. The items up for sale end up going to the highest bidder. The most common auction markets involve livestock and homes, or websites like eBay, where bidders may bid anonymously to win auctions. The last type of market is the financial market. The blanket term financial market refers to any place where securities, currencies, bonds, and other securities are traded between two parties. These markets are the basis of capitalist societies and they provide capital formation and liquidity for businesses. They can be physical or virtual. The financial market includes the stock exchanges such as the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, the LSE, and the TMX Group. Other kinds of financial markets include the bond market and the foreign exchange market, where people trade currencies.
Good morning everyone, I am Edmarie Erica Sibatukan and I will be discussing an introduction to supply and demand. So here's an overview for this topic. Adam Smith was a pioneer in explaining how market forces operated. Firms and consumers would work out the market price without any specific intervention. Supply and demand illustrates the working of a market and the interaction between suppliers and the consumers. In economics, Supply and demand is the relationship between the quantity of a commodity that producers wish to sell at various prices and the quantity that consumers wish to buy. So the supply and demand, they are one of the most basic and fundamental concepts of economics and of a market economy. The relationship between the supply and demand results in many decisions, such as the price of an item and how many will be produced in order to allocate resources in the most cost-effective and efficient way. So let's now define supply. Supply shows the different quantities of good that sellers are willing and able to sell at any given time at various possible prices, other things constant. In other words, supply refers to the amount of goods that are available. It is the total amount of a particular good or service available at a given time to consumers. The demand, it refers to the quantity of a product or service that the buyer is willing and able to purchase at various possible prices at any given time, ceteris paribus. The ceteris paribus, it is a Latin word which means all other things constant. So in other words, the demand, it refers to how many people want those goods. It is also a representation of a consumer's desire to purchase goods and services. It acts as a measurement of a consumer's willingness to pay a price for a specific good or service. So the supply and demand are two sides of the same coin. Generally, supply is how much of something you have, and the demand is how of something people want. One way to develop a more precise relationship between the two is to consider the price of something. Generally, when the demand for a good goes up, so does the price. This is because when people really want something, they may be willing to pay more for it. A seller will raise the price of a good if they think they can sell the good and it will potentially make them more profit. In the most basic sense, a seller knows that they can get more money for a product that is highly demanded. By tracking the price of a good, you can also track a good's supplies and demand. I have examples here of supply and demand concept. First is when supply of a product goes up, the price of a product goes down, and demand for the product can rise because it costs loss. At some point, too much of a demand for the product will cause the supply to diminish. As a result, prices will rise. The product will then become too expensive. Demand will go down at that price and the price will fall. Supply and demand should reach an equilibrium, which is the amount of goods being supplied is the same as the amount demanded and resources are allocated efficiently. Supply and demand are both very important to economic activity. They are both important for the economy because they impact the prices of consumers' goods and services within an economy. The consumer behavior influences the demand. Consumer behavior dictates which products are produced and sold because consumers create the demand that companies attempt to meet. As a result, the companies study consumer behavior in an attempt to understand the current demand and predict the future demand. It is very important that companies maintain the capacity to produce enough of a good or service that they can satisfy the consumer's demand. So the key takeaways for these topics are, in economics, supply and demand is the relationship between the quantity of a commodity that producers wish to sell at various prices and the quantity that consumers wish to buy. Though it is a seemingly straightforward relationship, but in practical application, it can become quite complicated. Second, the supply and demand are both important for the economy because they impact the prices of consumer goods and services within an economy. Third is, according to the market economy theory, the relationship between supply and demand balances out at a point in the future. This point is called the equilibrium price. Last is, economists and companies analyze the relationship between supply and demand when making strategic product decisions in order to satisfy their consumers' wants and needs. And that would be all for my report. I hope you learned something from this presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Good day, everyone. I am Angela Cleo Fasticanete, and I will be discussing the law of demand. This includes the demand schedule, the demand curve, the determinants of demand, and the demand function. A demand schedule is a table that shows the quantity demanded of a good or service at different price levels. A demand schedule most commonly consists of two columns. The first column lists a price for a product in ascending or descending order. The second column lists the quantity of the product desired or demanded at the price The price is determined based on research of the market. The table shows that as the price increases, the quantity demanded decreases. This is called the law of demand. Take note that the demand is different from quantity demanded. Demand refers to the whole schedule, while quantity demanded refers to the specific amount of good at a given price. When the data in the demand schedule is graphed to create the demand curve, it supplies a visual demonstration of the relationship between price and demand, allowing easy estimation of the demand for a product or service at any point along the curve. Demand curve. The demand curve is a graphical representation of the relationship between the price of a good or service and the quantity demanded for a given period of time. A demand curve shows how much a good or item people will want at different prices. What happens when there is a big sale? Well, at a lower price, people buy more. More shirts, more pants, more video games, etc. This is what happens on Black Friday, when retailers lower their prices to get people to buy stuff for Christmas. According to the graph, price is shown on the vertical axis and quantity is shown on the horizontal axis. The graph generally says that the quantity demanded is increasing as the price gets lower. Increase in demand will shift the demand curve to the right. Decrease in demand will shift the demand curve to the left. If the demand curve moved from left to right, this expresses as the law of demand. Law of demand states that as the price of a given commodity increases, the quantity demanded decreases, all else being equal. For example, if the price of corn rises, consumers would have an incentive to buy less corn and substitute it for other foods. So the total quantity of corn consumers demand will fall. There are five determinants of demand. The first one is the taste or preferences. If consumers have favorable response regarding to the good, demand will increase, making demand curve shift to the right. On the other hand, unfavorable response of consumers on the good will decrease demand and will shift demand curve to the left. The number two is the number of buyers. An increase in the number of buyers will increase in demand and make the demand curve shift to the right, otherwise to the left. The third one is income. There are two kinds of goods under income: normal goods or superior goods, and inferior goods. As income increases, demand for normal goods also increases. This means a positive relationship between income and normal goods. On the other hand, as income increases, demand for inferior goods will decrease. Thus, there is a negative or inverse relationship of income and inferior good. The fourth one is price of related goods. Substitute goods and complementary goods are considered as related goods. Substitute goods are two goods that can be used in place of one another. It is called substitute goods when there is an increase of price of a particular good and the demand of its related good increases. An example of it is the price of ri- is if the price of rice increases, people tend to find alternatives such as corn, potatoes, sweet potatoes, or even pasta. The another type of related good is the complementary goods. It is called complementary goods when there is an increase of price of a particular good and the demand of its related good decreases. Complementary goods are goods which rely on each other to add value. For examples are pancakes and maple syrup. Lastly, the expectation. An example, if there will be a super typhoon tomorrow, today's demand will increase because consumers are expecting higher price of goods after typhoon as well as the decrease of supply of goods. The effect of the change of these determinants cause the movement of one curve to another demand curve, which is called change in demand. Any movement from one point to another point along the same demand curve due to the change in price of the commodity itself, holding other determinants constant, is called change in quantity demanded. The next one is the demand function. A demand function is a mathematical equation which expresses the demand of a product or service as a function of its price and other factors such as the prices of the substitute and complementary goods, income, etc. A demand function creates a relationship between the demand in quantities of a product, which is a dependent variable, and factors that affect the demand, such as the price of the product, the price of substitute and complementary goods, average income, etc. Let's consider the market of the ride hailing apps and find out the factors that can affect the number of kilometers of ride hailing services demanded by riders on the day. The most important factors is the price charged per kilometer. One method of creating a demand function to use multiple regression analysis to find out the relationship between quantity demanded, the product price, and all other factors. The multiple regression analysis assigns different coefficients to each of the factors that affects the demand. Let's assume, for the sake of simplification, use only two variables. A as the price of the product itself and B as the increase in price of the completing public transportation and arrive at the following equation. Quantity demanded is equals to A minus B multiplied by P. Q is the kilometers demanded. P is the price per kilometer of ride-hailing service, and piece of PT is the increase in price per ride of the public transit system. The P component has a negative sign which shows that with each dollar increase in charge per kilometer, quantity demanded will drop by 150,000 kilometers per day. The piece of PT component, on the other hand, has a positive sign, which means that a $1 increase in public transport charge will result in increase in demand by 200,000 kilometers. Since the equation above creates a relationship not only of the kilometers demanded with the price charged but also with the price of a substitute, it represents both a shift in the demand curve and a movement along the demand curve. As long as there is no change in the price of public transport, we can simplify the demand function to a relationship between Q and P as Q is equal to 1,200,000 minus 150,000 multiplied by P.
Good day, everyone. I'm Catherine Faith Arcasiao from VSBA HRM 22D, and I will be presenting the law of supply, its definition, and other topics regarding the supply in economics. Now that we're going to the next topic, which talks about the idea of supply and how it works in economics, let us first define its brief definition before we go to its other subtopics, which includes the change in quantity supplied, change in supply, determinants of supply, supply schedule, supply curve, and lastly, supply function. When it comes to the definition of supply in economics, it is a fundamental economic concept that describes the total amount of a specific good or service that is available to consumers. It is also the willingness and ability of producers to create goods and services to take them to the market as it relates to the amount available at a specific price or the amount available across a range of prices if displayed on a graph. Lastly, it shows various amounts of goods that suppliers are willing and able to sell or make available in the market at a specific period of time. May it be within a day, a week, a month, or a year. This can be represented as supply schedule or supply table, supply curve, and a supply function. When it comes to the law of supply, it states that the other factors remaining constant, price and quantity supplied of a good are directly related to each other. In other words, when the price paid by buyers for a good rises, then suppliers increase the supply of that good in the market. So basically, law of supply depicts the producer's behavior at the time of changes in the price of goods and services. When the price of a good rises, the supplier increases the supply in order to earn a profit because of higher prices. With the help of applying the law of supply, let us now differ the definition of supply from quantity supplied. Quantity supplied can be changed when price change, leaving supply unchanged. This refers to the specific amount of good at a given price, while on the other hand, supply refers to the whole schedule and can change based on the changes of its determinants, known as the determinants of supply. This table shows how the law of supply affects the quantity supplied. The table shows that as the price increases, the quantity supplied also increases. So basically, when with applying the law of supply to the quantity supplied, whenever there are changes or adjustments happening with the price, the quantity supplied is also adjusted in accordance to the increasement or decreasement of the price. Bringing the topic of discussion regarding the supply and quantity supplied, the relation and difference of these two can be more elaborated with the help of what we call the supply curve. Quantity supplied refers to the amount of the good businesses provide at a specific price. So quantity supplied is an actual number, while economists use the term supply to refer to the entire curve. The supply curve is an equation or line on a graph showing the different quantities provided at every possible price. So how the supply curve works and how it can be explained through this graph presented. The supply curve is a graphic representation of the correlation between the cost of a good or service and the quantity supplied for a given period. In a typical illustration, the price will appear on a left vertical axis, while the quantity supplied will appear on the horizontal axis. Increase in supply will shift to the supply curve to the right, while decrease in supply will shift to the supply curve to the left. So basically, how supply curve works is that it moves upward from left to right, which expresses the law of supply, and as that the price of a given commodity increases, the quantity supplied increases with all else being equal. As an example to support the idea of the supply curve, let's say that some new soybean farmers enter the market, clearing forests and increasing the amount of land devoted to soybean cultivation. In this scenario, more soybeans will be produced even if the price remains the same, meaning that the supply curve itself shifts to the right in the graph below. In other words, supply will increase, and to put things much clearer, there are factors that shifts a supply curve, and this includes production cost. It inputs prices and resulting production costs are inversely related to the supply. In other words, changes in input prices and production costs cause an opposite change in the supply. If input prices and production costs increase, supply decreases, and if input prices and production costs decrease, supply increases. Second factor would be technology. Technological improvements in production shift to the supply curve. Specifically, improvements in technology increase supply, a rightward shift in the supply curve. The last factor would be the prices of other goods. Price changes for other goods are a little complicated. First, in order to affect the supply, producers must think the goods are related. In relation with the quantity supply still, if quantity supplied can be changed through the changes in price, hence supply can be changed through the change of its determinants. There are 6 determinants of supply. These determinants are also known as non-price determinants, and the first would be the resource price. This refers to the prices of resources used in the production like wages for labor and rent for capital. When there is an increase in the resource price, cost of production will increase that could lead to a decrease in supply, and on the other hand, lower resource price leads to lower cost of production that will increase supply. Second determinant would be technology. Upgrading the firm's production by using advanced technology from manual production can decrease the cost of production. Instead of paying laborers with wages, the firms can make efficient production by using machineries that helps lead to an increase in supply. The third would be the numbers of sellers. An increase in the number of suppliers will also increase the supply. The number of sellers willing and able to buy a goods affect the overall supply, and the relation is relatively straightforward. With more sellers, there is more supply, and with fewer sellers, there is less supply. The fourth determinant of supply would be the taxes and subsidies. Taxes are the part of the cost of production, while subsidies are the help of the government to the firms. Taxes are mandatory payments of the firms, as all firms should pay taxes, but only firms can avail for subsidies. While subsidies are given for those who have an important role in the society, and the government cannot give up its functions. When the government imposes higher tax to the firms, cost of production will increase, then supply will decrease. While when subsidies like fertilizer and free irrigation were given to the farmers, cost of production decreases that could lead to an increase in supply. The fifth determinant would be the price of other goods. These goods are not necessarily related goods or complementary goods, but these two goods were production using the same equipment and materials, wherein it is easy to shift production from one good to another when the price of one good has changed. Thus, other prices can be good for goods that are either substitutes in production or complements in production, because the two balls have also the same materials and using the same equipment in production. The last determinant of supply would be the expectation. When the firms expected that the price of their goods will increase in their future, the present supply of their goods will decrease, as to why the suppliers are expecting for a change in price in the future. When it comes to the definition of the change in supply and change in quantity supplied, change in supply is defined as the movement of one curve to another demand curve caused by the change in non-price determinants, meaning change in supply refers to a shift either to the left or right in the entire price-quantity relationship that defines a supply curve. Essentially, a change in supply is an increase or decrease in the quantity supplied that is paired with a higher or lower supply price. On the other hand, change in quantity supplied is defined as any movement of one point to another point along the same supply curve due to the change in the price of the good itself. Therefore, it refers to a movement along the supply curve which is caused only by a change in price. Similar to demand, a change in quantity supplied means that we're moving along the existing supply curve. Another representation of supply is the supply function. Given the above supply schedule as our basis, we can derive its supply function. Qs is equals to C plus dP, where Qs means quantity supplied, C being the intercept at price 0, D being the slope, and P being the price. It being our basis for discussion, the formula would be Qs, or quantity supplied, is equal to when C is just a variable that represents as the intercept at price of 0 is added to D being the slope and P being the price. The positive slope represents direct or positive relationship of price and quantity supplied. The intercept is the maximum amount of goods that the suppliers are willing and able to make available in the market at price 0. Thus, using the table given from the supply schedule, suppose there's a given problem where we need to substitute each of the elements. The given equation or example is supposed as, in order to get the slope in this problem using the table, we must get the second quantity supplied and subtract it to the first given over 10, then later on proceed to dividing its total, and that's how we get the 2 as the slope in the problem. To check the formula for finalizing the answer, substitute the P with the given prices from the table, as this function is applicable to linear equation where the slope is constant or equal.
A pleasant day, I am Shala Custodio, and as of this moment, I'll be presenting about market equilibrium, as well as shortage and surplus. Additionally, I'm gonna tackle about government intervention in market price in the form of price floor and price ceiling. So first, what is market equilibrium? Equilibrium means balance or equal. Therefore, market equilibrium exists when quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. Furthermore, supply and demand curves intersect at the equilibrium price. This is the price at which it is predicted the market will operate. If a market is at its equilibrium price and quantity, then it has no reason to move away from that point. However, if market is not at equilibrium, then economic pressures arise to move the market toward the equilibrium price and quantity. Market equilibrium can be represented by the following models. The first one is by finding the equilibrium price and quantity in tabular form. As you can see from the table, Market equilibrium is at price 10, where quantity demanded is equal to quantity supply of 80. Price 10 is called the equilibrium price, or PE, while quantity 80 is called the equilibrium quantity, or QE. Additionally, there are two problems faced by the market when market equilibrium is not present. At prices below the equilibrium, which is 0 and 5, quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. Thus, shortage is present. On the other hand, surplus occurs at prices above equilibrium price, such as 15, 20, and 25, where quantity demanded is less than quantity supplied. Furthermore, to compute how much the shortage and surplus is in the market, simply subtract quantity supplied to quantity demanded. To give an illustration, as you can see in the left part, where at price 5, QS is equal to 70 and QD is equal to 90. So from the earlier formula, QS minus QD, and in this case, 70 minus 90 is equal to negative 20. The negative sign represents shortage. Thus, there is shortage of 20 units. Meanwhile, on the second table, at price 20, QS is equal to 100 and QD is equal to 60. So same formula, QS minus QD, or 100 minus 60 is equal to 40. In this case, positive value represents surplus. Thus, there is a surplus of 40 units. The second representation is by finding the equilibrium price and quantity through graphical analysis. With the same figures given as the previous representation, quantities of demand and supply are plotted in the graph. As what is perceived in the graph, figures that are above the market equilibrium are already considered as surplus, while what are below market equilibrium, or ME, are regarded as shortage. Furthermore, the surplus will push down the prices as sellers will compete to enable them to sell their product, and in doing so, reduce quantity supplied and increase quantity demanded until equilibrium is achieved. Meanwhile, shortage in the market is due to a lower price and would drive prices up as buyers would compete among themselves to get hold of the available product, and in doing so, may increase quantity supply and decrease quantity demanded until it has market equilibrium or equilibrium is met. However, there are cases that even though equilibrium price is present, consumers cannot afford to buy goods because it is expensive for them, and sellers cannot sell the goods because it is cheap on their part. Hence, government intervention on price is needed to help both consumers and sellers. Specifically, they implement price ceiling or price support. A price ceiling, which is also called a price control, is the maximum legal price fixed by the government on consumer goods like rice, oil, sugar, and etc. to keep prices from further rising. An effective price ceiling can be found below the equilibrium price but may result in shortage. On the other hand, price support or price floor is imposed to help the sellers when they consider the price of goods low for them to recover their costs. It is the minimum legal price that the sellers can charge on goods. The most prevalent use of price floors is seen through the prices set by the government for agricultural products such as palay and corn. The government usually attempts to stabilize or raise farm incomes by maintaining prices of farm commodities above their equilibrium values using its power to alter price. And when sellers are charging illegal prices, they are considered as black markets. Black markets are present if a price ceiling is there in the market and black market operate at a much higher price. On the other hand, Black markets operate at a lower price during the price floor.
Good day, everyone. I am Beatrice Teresa D. Dayawan, and I'll be discussing the last part for the topic of market equilibrium, which is the continuation from the previous reporter. And I am also going to discuss an introduction for the topic elasticity, which will later on be elaborated by the next group. Before we introduce elasticity, I would like to have a quick continuation related to the topic of market equilibrium. As a recap, supply refers to the amount of goods that are available, while demand refers to how many people want those goods. On the other hand, economic equilibrium is a condition or state in which economic forces are balanced. In effect, economic variables remain unchanged from their equilibrium values in the absence of external factors. Economic equilibrium is also referred to as market equilibrium. In change in demand, supply, and equilibrium, determinants of demand and supply to change demand, supply, and equilibrium are subject to consideration. The changes in the three concepts answers the question, what will happen to the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity if there is a change in demand and supply? The equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price will be constantly stated. Thus, the equilibrium price is the only price where the desires of consumers and the desires of the producers agree. Meanwhile, the mutually desired amount or number of products between consumers and producers is called the equilibrium quantity. There are 8 scenarios to be considered. First are the 4 considered simple cases. First of the simple cases is supply is constant while there is an increase in demand, meaning keeping supply curve unchanged, both equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity will increase. Second, supply is constant while there is a decrease in demand. If this is the case, this will result to a decrease in both equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity when supply is constant. Third is when supply increases while demand is constant. Given a constant demand, this change will increase the equilibrium quantity and will decrease the equilibrium price. Fourth, supply decreases while demand is constant. Given a constant demand, this change will decrease the equilibrium quantity and will increase the equilibrium price. Moving forward are the complex cases. First of the complex case is when demand increases and supply increases. When this is the case, the effect is not easily determined and it depends on how large or small the change is. Second, demand decreases and supply increase. This is where equilibrium quantity is indeterminate while equilibrium price will decrease. Third, demand increases and supply decreases. In this case, equilibrium quantity is indeterminate while equilibrium price will increase. Lastly, demand decreases and supply decrease. In this case, when both demand and supply decrease, equilibrium quantity will decrease while equilibrium price is indeterminate. As a conclusion, without the 4 simple cases, the remaining 4 complex cases will be hard to determine or discuss. Moving forward is to elasticity. Just a reminder, this is only an introduction as I believe the next group are the ones who will be elaborating it more. So elasticity measures the degree of responsiveness of the dependent variable, which are the quantity demanded or the quantity supplied to the independent variable, which are either price, income, or price of related goods, all other things constant or equal. Under elasticity are the concepts of price elasticity of demand, price elasticity of supply, income elasticity of demand, and cross elasticity of demand. Price elasticity of demand or EP measures the degree of responsiveness of quantity demanded to change in the price of the good itself and other things constant. Price elasticity of supply or ES measures the degree of responsiveness of quantity supplied to changes in the price of the good itself and other things constant. On the other hand, income elasticity of demand or EY measures the degree of responsiveness of quantity demanded to change in consumers' income and other things constant. And lastly, cross-elasticity of demand or EC measures the degree of responsiveness of quantity demanded to change in the price of related goods and other things constant. Lastly is the interpretation of price elasticity of demand. Again, this is an introduction for the subsequent topics which will be elaborated more by Group T. So, it is 5 interpretations, namely elastic, unitary, inelastic, perfect inelastic, and perfect elastic. For elastic or relatively elastic, it has a flatter demand curve. For example, luxury items. Next is unitary or unit elastic demand. Its total revenue remain constant even if sellers increase or decrease the price. Next is inelastic or relatively inelastic demand. Here, to increase total revenue, price must be increased. Example, sugar, rice, and salt. Meanwhile, perfect inelastic demand is where it shows that at any price, quantity demanded remains constant. Lastly, a perfectly elastic demand or PE shows that at any quantity bought or sold, the price remains constant.